Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're doing something a little different. We are pushing aside the history books, the documentaries.
All the hindsight.
Exactly, all the hindsight. We're not looking at what we know happened.
Hmm.
We want to know what a very specific group of people thought was happening in real time.
And for that, we've pulled a document from the archives. We're going back to early 1960.
The Year of Africa.
That's the one, 1960. A moment where the map of the entire world is, literally being redrawn.
And we are zooming in on one place in particular, the Belgian Congo. It's massive, resource-rich, and it is just hurtling toward independence on June 30th of that year.
And normally you hear about the big speeches, the public face of all this.
But we're looking at the private face, the bureaucratic one. We've got our hands on a document titled CIA Political Strategy in the Pre-Independence Belgian Congo.
With stamped secret, of course.
Of course, it comes from the DDP, which is the Deputy Director for Plans. And if you're a fan of spy jargon, this thing is just, well, it's a goldmine. You see this code name on every page, Kubark.
It sounds like a bad guy from a Cold War novel, doesn't it? Kubark.
It really does. But it's just a cryptonym.
Yeah, a code name for the CIA itself.
So when the document says Kubark believes this or Kubark must do that, it's the agency talking to itself.
And that's really our mission for this deep dive. We are not looking for James Bond gadgets here.
No exploding cigars.
No. We are trying to understand a worldview. How did this intelligence bureaucracy diagnose the situation in the Congo? And, what was their actual written down plan to shape it?
And the stakes were just incredibly high. This wasn't passive observation. The document states, and I'm quoting here, the U.S. aim is to ensure a government is elected that is oriented to the West and devoted to ideals which may best guarantee stability.
Stability. That's the word, isn't it? We're going to have to unpack what that really meant.
Because what Kubark meant by stability.
And what a Congolese person on the street might have meant.
Yeah.
Probably two very, very different things.
Okay, so let's put on our analyst hats. It's early 1960. We're looking at the Congo. What is Kubark seeing? Because reading this, they sound anxious.
Anxious is a good word for it.
Yeah.
The first thing that just leaps off the page is this deep frustration with how politics are taking shape on the ground.
What do you mean?
They look at all these new political parties, and they identify a core problem. They call it extraordinary fractionalization.
Fractionalization, that's a very detached clinical word.
It is. What they mean is that political groups were forming, in their words, strictly on the basis of tribal connections. And for an analyst in Washington, D.C., that was a huge red flag.
But why? I mean, that's how the society was structured. Why does Kubark see that natural social order as a problem to be solved?
It comes down to how they define a functional state. The document lays out this very clear sort of A to B to C logic.
Okay.
This tribalism leads to fractionalization. And fractionalization, in their view, prevents the development of a politically unified state.
And let me guess. Without a unified state, you can't have a stable modern economy.
You've got it. The document is so blunt about this. It says, without that unity, there is no secure base for economic development.
So that's it right there. The CIA's obsession with political unity wasn't about some philosophical ideal of a nation state.
No, it's an economic calculation.
You need a central government to sign the contracts, to protect the investment.
Exactly. In that Cold War mindset, you need a centralized authority to facilitate trade, to extract resources, to keep things running smoothly. If a country is split into dozens of competing local interests, it's messy. It's bad for business.
It's sand in the gears of the machine.
And it makes the place vulnerable. If the economy stumbles, Western influence weakens. So for them, the very social fabric of the Congo, its complexity, was a structural problem.
So if the system itself is the problem, you'd think they'd be looking for leaders to fix it. You know, the great man theory of history. Find the Congolese, George Washington.
You would think.
Yeah.
But, the way they talk about the aspiring politicians is just scathing.
It really is. I circled this one line a few times. The analysts write, no one leader has shown himself to be a disinterested statesman.
Disinterested statesman. That's such a loaded Western concept to project onto them.
Right. They're looking for someone who's above the fray, acting purely for the good of the abstract nation, and they are shocked when they can't find one.
Yeah, they're disappointed. The document goes on to claim that these leaders are just using their tribal ties for self-aggrandizement, not for any real ideology.
It feels like a massive projection. They're basically complaining that the Congolese aren't playing by the rules of a political science textbook.
That's it. And they're frustrated that the only thing that unites everyone is the call for independence.
Which is, I mean, of course it is. They're a colony. That's the only thing that should matter at that moment.
But look at how Kubark frames it. The document basically says, well, since independence is already a foregone conclusion, that platform is meaningless.
So they see it as just a naked scramble for power.
They say, these guys aren't patriots. They're opportunists fighting for a slice of the pie.
That is deeply cynical. But I guess that cynicism serves a purpose, doesn't it? If you tell yourself they're all just selfish opportunists.
It makes it much easier to justify trying to manipulate them. You don't have to treat them as partners. You can treat them as assets or as liabilities.
Which brings us to the big red elephant in the room.
The Soviet Union. The bloc, as they call it.
You can't have a 1960s CIA doc without the Soviets. And the objective is clear. The identification, isolation, and exclusion of bloc-supported, bloc-oriented, and Marxist groups.
Standard Cold War playbook.
But, and this is what genuinely surprised me, the analysis is more nuanced than I expected. You expect them to just be screaming, communist, at everyone.
Right, painting everyone with the same red brush.
Yeah.
But they don't.
They don't. And this is a really important point. There's a big difference between the public propaganda and the internal intelligence analysis.
For sure. Kubark sees a contradiction. They admit that a lot of Congolese leaders were accepting what they call bloc blandishments and aid.
So taking Soviet money, Soviet advice, whatever was on offer.
Yes, but, and this is the key insight, the document explicitly says that taking the help did not mean they were ideologically communist.
That is a huge distinction to make at the height of the Cold War.
It is. The memo says the leaders have not matured ideologically and are simply willing to take help from any quarter.
So Kubark saw them not as true believers, but as pragmatists. They're not reading Das Kapital. They're just thinking, hey, if the Soviets are writing checks, we're cashing them.
Exactly. It frames them as opportunists, not ideologues. And that diagnosis leads to a very clever strategic shift.
Because if you go around accusing them of being communists and they know they're not, you're just going to alienate them.
You push them away. So the document advises that instead of attacking the Congolese groups for taking the money, Kubark should, and this is a quote, attack, where possible, the bloc sources which are attempting to subvert them.
Wow. So don't go after the person taking the money. Go after the source of the money. Cut off the supply line.
It's a supply chain attack. The thinking is, if the local guy is just looking for a sponsor, then our job is to eliminate the bad sponsor so he has to come to us, the good sponsor.
It's a competition for influence, not an ideological crusade against the local politicians themselves.
That's it. So let's just recap the diagnosis. Kubark sees, 1, tribalism is bad for business. 2, the leaders are selfish, not statesmen. And 3, they're taking Soviet cash out of pragmatism, not passion for Marx.
That's the chessboard. So what was the play? We have the diagnosis. What's the prescription?
Yeah.
How did they plan to mold the situation into the West-oriented stability they craved?
Okay, so this is where we get to the how-to section, the mechanisms of influence. And it starts with the most obvious move.
Picking winners.
Picking winners. The document is explicit. The task is to identify individual leaders whose policies most nearly coincide with ours and offer them some support.
And given their fear of fractionalization, their ideal candidate would have to be
Someone who can unite people.
a unifier.
Exactly. They wanted to back movements that cut across tribal lines and had a wide geographic base. They're looking for someone who can hold the center, because a unified center is the only way to get that secure economic base.
But then the cynicism, or maybe it's realism, kicks back in. They know their guy might not win. It's too chaotic.
So they have a backup plan.
A backup plan I'm calling the insurance policy.
That's a perfect name for it. It is absolutely risk management for geopolitics.
The document says to identify leaders who don't agree with the U.S., whose views may not coincide with ours, but who look like they're fairly sure of some success.
The people you don't really like, but who are probably going to be in the new government somewhere?
Exactly. And the instruction is simple. Avoid any action which will make enemies of them.
Don't burn that bridge.
Don't burn the bridge. The document literally calls this taking insurance for future shifts in political power. You hedge your bets, you back your favorite, but you make sure you're on good terms with the competition just in case.
That is so pragmatic. The goal shifts from ensuring a moral or ideological victory to simply maintaining access.
Access is everything.
It's the currency of intelligence.
Yeah.
You can't influence someone who won't even take your call.
And speaking of influence under pressure, that footnote, there's a reference to a CIA telegram number 27945 from May 4th.
May 4th. Independence is June 30th. They're running out of time. The panic must be setting in.
For sure. The telegram tells the station on the ground to develop the widest possible spectrum of contacts and to get people close to the top in all parties.
All parties, even the ones they think are taking block money.
Mm-hmm. But here's the kicker, the reality check. The telegram admits, and this is crucial, that given how little time was left, Kubark couldn't appreciably affect the elections.
They knew they couldn't rig it. It was too late. The train had already left the station.
So the mission changed. It wasn't about deciding the winner anymore. It was about buying goodwill for after the election. They just needed, quote, means of access.
That's a huge admission of their own limits. We think of the CIA from this era as these all-powerful puppet masters.
Right.
But here they are, in their own secret cable, saying, we can't stop this train, so we better make sure we have a seat in the dining car when it arrives.
So when you look at this document as a whole, it's really a snapshot of a superpower trying to fit a new complex nation into a very simple box.
A box labeled stable, pro-West, unified.
And just getting so frustrated that the reality on the ground wouldn't fit neatly inside it.
Which I think brings us to the so what? Why does this matter today?
Exactly. We've been deep in the weeds of the text, but what's the bigger takeaway?
For me, it highlights this tension that still exists in foreign policy. It's the tension between the desire for stability and the messy reality of, organic democracy.
Unpack that a little.
Well, Kubark wanted a unified state for economic reasons. They wanted one phone number to call to get things done. They needed predictability for their investments.
Okay.
But the Congo was messy. It was complex. It was tribal. And by insisting on this clean, centralized model, and by backing leaders who fit that mold, you often bypass the necessary, difficult work of local compromise.
You're trying to fast forward through the messy part to get to the stable part that benefits you.
Precisely. And when you prioritize that external need for stability, you often end up favoring strongmen. You favor centralized movements that might not actually represent the diversity of the people. You can kind of short-circuit a country's natural political growth.
It makes you ask that first question, doesn't it? If a foreign power props up a unifier just to keep the mines operating, are you helping that nation's democracy develop, or are you actually harming it?
That's the million-dollar question. Maybe that fractionalization Kubark was so scared of was a necessary step. Maybe the Congo needed to figure out its own path. But the Cold War didn't have time for that.
And what about the leaders themselves? The document calls them immature for taking help from anyone who offered it. But was it?
Looking back, probably not. If you're a brand new nation with no money and no infrastructure, and the two most powerful countries in the world are knocking on your door,
maybe getting them into a bidding war for your loyalty is the smartest possible move.
it's not being an opportunist. It's just called diplomacy. It was maybe the only real leverage they had. Kubark saw it as a character flaw. The Congolese leaders probably saw it as survival.
Which brings us to a final question. How does the definition of a stable government differ between an external power like Kubark and a local citizen?
They're almost never the same. For Kubark, stability meant oriented to the West and safe for economic development.
But for a citizen,
stability might mean my local customs are respected, my village is safe, or just I have enough food for my family.
and sometimes the leader who makes things safe for economic development is the same one who tramples all over those local needs.
That is the fundamental misalignment. The agency was optimizing for a geopolitical outcome, and that often came at the expense of local cohesion.
So what we're seeing here is an institution trying to impose its own version of order on a world it doesn't fully get, mostly to protect its own economic and strategic interests.
It's this strange mix. On one hand, some very sophisticated analysis, they were right that these guys weren't die-hard Marxists.
And on the other hand, this deeply paternalistic, interventionist mindset.
Picking winners, hedging bets, buying insurance.
Yeah, and the thing that really sticks with me is that admission. They knew they couldn't actually change the election results, but they still felt this compulsion to get in there, to hand out money, to make connections.
To keep a foot in the door.
Exactly. And that, I think, leaves us with one final provocative thought. In the world of intelligence, we tend to think the goal is always victory. You know, your side wins the election, you defeat the bad guy.
But this document, it suggests something else.
It really does. It suggests that maybe victory is secondary. The real prize is just being in the room, having a seat at the table, Even if you lose, you need to own a piece of the winner. It just makes you wonder. In the long game of geopolitics, is access sometimes more valuable than victory?
That is the question.
Something to think about. That's all for this deep dive into the Cubark files. Thanks for listening.